Well, hello everyone, Angus Pryor here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce my good friend and colleague, Yolanda Gerges. How are you, Yolanda?
I'm good. How are you, Angus?
I'm excellent, and I'm looking forward to this. The fact of the matter is that I have had Yolanda come and do some stuff for my clients previously, and they still talk about it, which means it's high quality stuff. Recordings that you did for us lives on a website that we look after, and somebody literally mentioned it to me last week, so there you go. Now, today we are going to talk about mistakes that practices make with retention. And this is in the context of a little thing that the two of us have put together, which is if you can you can attract, if you can convert, and you can retain, you must grow. It's not a case of if, it's impossible not to. Yolanda, it's obvious to me you've got a real passion talking about patient retention. Why don't you give us a bit of your background? I know for one thing that you started out as a healthcare professional, but in a different field. How did you go from there? How did you end up in this space? And tell us a bit about the business that you're in and, what you spend all your time doing.
Well, I actually started my career, yes, as a health professional, and I started out as a podiatrist. I soon discovered that I loved the business and I loved people, but I didn't quite love feet. So I decided that what I'd really love to do is to really immerse myself in understanding more about what makes a successful practice. So I quickly went on and I did an MBA and I did a research thesis on how private practices grow through retention efforts. So that was my primary thesis. That was in 2006. I've had my own consultancy business for 10 years and I have the Peak Performance Practice, which works with dentists on patient retention efforts. And I've also have Peak Hygiene Performance, which specifically works with dentists who have a hygiene department and want to grow their hygiene departments through the power of retention. Yeah.
So Yolanda's expertise is absolutely with retention. So let's talk about some of the retention mistakes that dental practices are making every day.
Well, it's really interesting because whenever I ask a dental practice or a dentist, what is patient retention? Often I get a response that patient retention is patients who accept treatments. And in actual fact, that's not patient retention. That's actually conversion. True patient retention is percentage of patients that return to your practice and stay in your practice on a regular basis. So the most common denominator is the percentage of patients that are returning for an exam and clean within the required time frame, which is usually about 6 months. And so one of the first issues with practices is that they don't have a clear definition as to what retention actually is. They think that retention is reactivating patients or activating patients, but that's like a reactive strategy. What happens is that it's often implemented in a panic when there's gaps in the schedule, or they think, oh, where's Mrs. Jones gone? Well, I better work on my retention, so I'll start reactivating patients to come back. But the reality is that you're actually bringing them back into a way which is not a predictable, tried and tested system to actually keep patients in your practice. So that's why hygiene in particular is a really important metric to have a look at to really assess true retention in your practice.
Can I ask, just before you continue, because I was literally discussing this with a dentist last week. I suppose two questions. One is, what is kind of average for retention? And this is I'm working on the basis that retention means that they're turning up every 6 months for an appointment. Would that be right?
Yeah, for hygiene, because urgent care is it's the reactive or it's an irregular treatment. A patient might come back once every 2 years for an emergency. So we're talking about regular 6-month visit at least.
So what would you say is kind of average across the industry? That may be hard to comment on. But secondly, what's bad, what's good?
Yeah. So what we're actually seeing, it's not easy to track retention in practice management software. So we have our own software that actually does this. But what we're finding is practices are usually around the 40%. And when really the ideal benchmark's between 90 to 95%.
Yeah, I'm so interested to hear you say that, because it's almost like you knew. The practice that I spoke to last week, they talked about high 30s, and my immediate reaction was, what? High 30s, so there's 60% of your business that should be coming to see you more regularly, and they've just disappeared.
Well, disappeared, maybe gone elsewhere. And also you got to question, because hygiene is really linked to health. Really, hygiene is infection management, and so you've got to really question the continuity of care of the patient if they're not coming back regularly to, a care provider on a regular basis.
Okay, all right, please continue. Well, that data's, I suppose it paints a pretty poor picture and therefore lots of room for improvement.
Absolutely. So the first one was the clear definition, so not having this clear definition. And the second one is, which goes on the back of what we're discussing, is not having a predictable, tried and tested system within the practice. So I guess using, ad hoc or irregular methods to actually bring patients back. And so a system is actually a tried and tested, predictable system if it's, in place. Everyone knows what their role is on how to retain patients, and there's at least one person in the practice who's responsible for overseeing that system and potentially reviewing and reporting back on a regular basis. That's the difference between those practices that take it seriously and get results and those who don't. They actually embed it as a system. It's not just, they don't pay lip service to it.
Yeah.
So that's really the second thing. And then I guess the third thing that we see often is they don't give the patient a strong reason to return to your practice. So a lot of the times, hygienists and even dentists, so with or without a hygiene department, they'll say, we'll see you in 6 months' time, Mrs. Jones. Or everything's good, everything's fine, we'll see you in 6 months' time. And a lot of the time the patient's thinking, well, so what? Why do I need to return? What's the consequence of not returning on time? What's the benefit to me? And I believe that's a reason why cleans or dentistry and cleans in particular can get commoditized, and they're sort of seen as this discretionary thing. Oh, I need my teeth to be whitened a little bit. Oh, I better go see the hygienist or dentist. Or my teeth feel dirty, so I need to see the dentist. Or I need to see the dentist or the hygienist because that's what my mum did, or that's what I was told or lectured to. There's no real strong, for the majority of patients, there's no real strong reason to return regularly on time. So it's an industry problem. It's the way patients are being educated, and that's why patients go from practice to practice and cleans are commoditized, and they'll ask, how much is it for an exam and clean? Because they're sort of seeing it more as a discretionary rather than something that's about their health and well-being.
Yeah.
So that is something that hygiene gets absolutely diminished, whether a dentist has a hygiene department or not. Yet ironically, it is the one thing in a dental practice that is your key patient retention center. And if you're keeping your patients coming back regularly and it's in their best interest, that's actually how you're going to grow your practice. Otherwise, you are going to get gaps in your schedule. Your patient flow is going to be poor. You're going to put more and more pressure to bring in more new patients, and you're going to keep reactivating old ones, and you'll be lucky if you get a 10% strike rate on those patients that have been lost over the years.